Good evening. I'm calling the regular meeting of the University Place City Council for Monday, May 3rd, 2021 to order. We are conducting our meeting remotely in compliance with the special Open Public Meeting Act rules issued by Governor Inslee's emergency order. City Clerk, can you please conduct the roll call?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Figueroa.
Councilmember Figueroa, present.
Councilmember Keel.
Councilmember Keel, present.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, present.
Councilmember McCluskey.
Councilmember McCluskey, present.
Councilmember Fleming.
Councilmember Fleming here.
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington.
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, present.
And Mayor Belisi.
Mayor Belisi here.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we begin our meeting, we have a few special rules I want to go over with everyone. First is the participation in public comments. Written comments that were received by email prior to 5:30 this evening were electronically transmitted to City Council for their consideration. As of 5:30 this evening, we received no email communication. Subject to technological limitations, the Council will also accept telephonic comments. Members of the public can call the number listed on the agenda, 1-509-342-7253, conference ID 424-524-523-195#. For those calling in, please be advised that calls will be taken in the order received. And this evening, we do not have a public hearing this evening, so I will not be using the speaking and voting chart that we are accustomed to. However, we do have a study session this evening, and so for that, I will be using the hand raise, allowing everybody to speak once before I call on you a second time. So with that, may I ask Councilmember McCluskey to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilmember McCluskey. At this time, we are on the approval of the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as submitted, please?
Mayor Belisi, this is Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, and I move for the approval of the agenda as submitted.
I have a first. Do I have a second?
Councilmember Keel, I second.
I have a first and a second. Are there any objections to the motion as presented? Okay. Hearing none and seeing none, the approval of the agenda passes unanimously. Thank you. This evening, we have a presentation, and for that, I'm asking Steve Carmody, the University Place branch manager, to please turn on his screen, and welcome to our meeting this evening. I can't believe it's been 75 years since the Pierce County system was developed and put into work, and I know that our University Place branch is one of those branches that has significantly worked well and been well accepted by our constituents, and is unfortunately this past year, because citizens can't physically go into the library, they have to come out and get their materials outside. But I can tell you just from walking past that even after 75 years, our library system is still well received by the community and is a much needed service, regardless of whether we have in-person or we have curbside delivery. So this evening we are honoring the 75 years of existence of the Pierce County Library by issuing a proclamation. So with that, I'd like to read this proclamation to Steve Carmody, who will be receiving the proclamation later this evening in person, or will be delivered to the UP branch after our meeting this evening. The proclamation says, whereas the Pierce County Library System started serving 55,000 people on May 1st, 1946, offering 6,385 books from 7 locations with 1,108 cardholders. And whereas today the Pierce County Library serves 620,000 people, offering nearly 1 million books, movies, and other items from 20 locations and online, with approximately 360,000 cardholders. And whereas the format of books and materials and requests from the public have transformed in the past 75 years, the library system has reimagined services to meet the public's needs to be a major regional leader, to provide learning resources for all ages, deliver books, materials, and classes for enjoyment, and offer welcoming places and spaces for diverse communities to connect. And whereas 1946 Pierce County Library may not recognize 2021 Pierce County Library with computers, printers, online books, instantly available on computers, tablets, and phones, and live online classes and events, 1946 Pierce County Library would know 2021 Pierce County Library by its continued commitment to connect people with valued, reliable resources at the right time. And whereas the library continues to be dedicated stewards of the public's investment to support residents' growth and curiosity, offer excellent reading choices, and work to connect and strengthen growing and changing communities. And whereas the Pierce County Library thanks Pierce County communities for allowing the library system to be the community's choice for the discovery and exchange of information and ideas, and to spark success for residents for 75 years. Now, therefore, the City Council of the City of University Place do hereby proclaim May 1st through December 31st, 2021 as Pierce County Library's 75th Diamond Anniversary, proclaimed by the City Council of the City of University Place, Washington on May 3rd, 2021. Wow, that is an absolute amazing success. Congratulations. And to think here, many years ago, people were saying libraries were going to go by the wayside and people weren't going to be using them. And yet, despite that, the Pierce County Library has been able to move with the times and has been able to continue to offer services to the community. And even during the pandemic has been a reliable resource for many families in being able to get books for their students and their kids, and even resources to seniors and just general community members, whether it be getting printed copies of things or just information from the librarians that man the booth. So I want to really thank your crew for the investment and the time that you give to our citizens here in University Place. So with that, Mr. Carmody, do you have anything to say to the community?
Well, thank you, Mayor Bellisi. It's an honor to receive the proclamation on behalf of you and the council members here tonight and the University Place community. I just wanted to give one plug for a pretty cool initiative that we have going on right now. So this is a storybook called The Big Umbrella that we've taken in honor of the 75th anniversary. And we've got over 20 story walks throughout the county and 2 of them here in University Place. So it's a very colorful book about inclusion in the community and having a big umbrella that we can all fit under within the community. And we've got a story walk that's set up in Homestead Park, right down the road from City Hall and the library, and then also in Chambers Creek Regional Park at the north end near the playground. So we'll have those up through the end of this month. It's socially distanced, outside, a good way to promote some exercise and literacy at the same time. And thank you very much for this honor tonight. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. I can tell you, I myself enjoyed doing the story walk during my evening walks. It was a lot of fun to be a kid for a change. And it was fun to see the kids with their parents enjoying the walk also. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, with that, our next item on the agenda is public comments. And as I indicated earlier in the evening, we had not received an email yet from our community, nor do we have anybody from outside the community on our meeting this evening. So with that, I will close the public comment section and move on to the consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as submitted?
Mayor Belisi, this is Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, and I move approval for the consent agenda as submitted.
Okay, I have a first. Do I have a second?
Councilmember Keel, I second.
Okay, I have a first and a second. Are there any objections to the motion as made? Okay, not seeing or hearing any. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the city manager report. May I have Mr. Sugg turn his camera on? Good
Yes,
evening, Mr. Sugg.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I would normally give you an update on some projects and programs that are going on. We have quite a few of those, but we have one emerge on Friday that was brought to my attention by the city attorney, Matt Kaiser. I'm going to have him brief you, but I just to highlight, the county council is scheduled tomorrow to take action on an ordinance for hazard pay for grocery workers. Now, we would normally anticipate that would only affect unincorporated areas, but it may impact incorporated areas as well. And that's why I want Matt to brief you on this. So with Matt.
Thank you, Steve. Matt Kaiser, city attorney. As Steve mentioned, Pierce County Council set to take action on a vote tomorrow on legislation that would impose countywide, both in incorporated and unincorporated areas, an additional hazard pay requirement of an additional $4 an hour on grocery store workers. This legislation was originally offered at the Pierce County Council on April 20th. So it's moving on a very rapid timetable. We learned of it through some of our other municipal colleagues, as well as generally tracking what the county's been doing. So far in tracking the legislation, the cities of Sumner and Bonnie Lake have offered written comments in opposition to this. I've been advised that the city of Lakewood either will be or has, if they've done it, I can't find it, will be separately offering correspondence in opposition to this legislation. Because this is moving fairly quickly, we kind of wanted to get a quick pulse from the council, whether council was similarly predisposed to send a letter to the Pierce County Council expressing a view, whether it was an opposition view, a pro view, or what have you. One feature of this legislation has it emerge out of the county council committee process on Friday. Originally, it was just drafted. This applies countywide, incorporated and unincorporated areas. However, they added a particular wrinkle in there, which was if a city wanted to, quote, opt out of this legislation, they would then in turn be required to pass a resolution saying it opts out within their respective boundaries. That's somewhat problematic. The traditional view on this is that counties get to regulate within the unincorporated areas, cities get to regulate within the incorporated areas. So for the county council to weigh in this regard is somewhat very atypical, to say the least, in terms of traditionally how county-city relationships have gone. Because of the short timetable on this, like I said, we wanted to kind of get a quick pulse from the council. If council was predisposed towards sending a letter in, doing nothing, that sort of thing. And I saw two hands all of a sudden go up as soon as I started mentioning that. So with that, I'm happy. I've been asked to keep my comments somewhat short, but I'm happy to pause for questions or comment for air now or yield to the direction of the mayor.
Okay, given the urgency in this and the fact that it's only your personal opinion and a consensus that's needed to drive this initiative forward, I will allow brief comments to be made on that. And to ensure that everyone gets their input on this, I will use the seating chart that we've typically done. So if you could keep your comments brief and just a yay or nay would be extremely helpful. So Councilmember Figueroa.
Thank you, Mayor. And that was a mouthful there from our city attorney. So I'm going to hopefully, I think I understood what he said. So based on that, and if my comments are inappropriate, you'll know it real quick here. But I think that I don't believe that the county council should be imposing such type of ordinance or law, regulation, whatever you want to call it, on incorporated areas where there is already a governing body that is there by statute, state statute, to govern the local area. That's what we're here for. And I feel that sets a precedent for the county or anybody else to take that local governance away. Furthermore, I don't think that is an appropriate move among county leaders to do that without more appropriate feedback and input from other cities. They can do whatever they want with their unincorporated area, but certainly I feel that they're heavily stepped into the municipalities' governance in their area. I sincerely oppose it, and I'm not opposing it or the $4 or not. That's not the issue. Is how this is being handled that I'm opposing. And so with that, I hope that my colleagues and we as a council will give that feedback to the council, and we get to the Pierce County Council, and I hope that we have representation in one form or another, preferably both in person at the hearing or at their council meeting and in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Keel. You are muted, sir.
Okay, I couldn't find my button. Too many screens. So just real quick, no, I'm not at all into the county imposing something on us. I think that it is out of order because we are incorporated. The other thing is that I am opposed to them passing it and allowing and then saying it's okay for us to opt out. I mean, that is again shifting something onto us that it looks like we're actually doing something against. They have no standing to do that, in my opinion. I think that we need to let our representative know that directly with a letter. I intend to follow up with a phone call to him, and if other of my fellow council members want to do that, I would ask you to do that too as well. He needs to hear from us now that we're not for that. If you're not for that, like I am.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, I concur with what's been said on this matter, and I say nay, no, thank you.
Councilmember McCluskey.
Thank you, Mayor. I concur with what is said. I don't think there is a need to fast track this at this point in time. I think it has to have a full vetted discussion. They shouldn't disrespect the local municipalities' control and authority moving forward with this this action. I do feel that the businesses and the grocery stores in particular need to have input into this and also some of the outcomes as to the cost of groceries, deliverables. Grocery store employees are certainly not like medical personnel, what they're in, having people breathe on them, fluid exchanges, and so they're not in the same boat as grocery stores employees are. And I believe that the grocery stores industry, if there is an issue with safety, should protect their own. And also, if they don't, we have the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department that should be, in fact, monitoring this issue as well to keep the grocery store employees safe. So no, I'm for a letter. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Fleming.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, I know that by law, and Matt kind of alluded to it earlier, you know, the county operates as a extension of the state. However, the county exists to provide governance over the unincorporated areas of Pierce County. And I'll be very blunt, it's none of their business to be getting into the cities, any city, and telling them how to run their business. This piece of legislation clearly oversteps their boundaries, and I support all the comments that were previously made by fellow council members. And I would take it one step further. Madam Mayor, I would support a letter back to the city, or to the county council, admonishing them, for one, you know, under your signature, and making it very clear we don't need them governing the city of University Place. And the idea that they would, I mean, I think this is very brazen on their part to say the only way out of this is you have to send us a resolution to opt out. I'd just like to say, who in the hell do they think they are? You know, with a big question mark attached to that. You know, I think it was Kent that made the comment about our governance, our city, and I think we need to make that message very clear. If there's a vote needed, I think you've heard from every council member. There's unanimity on, I said that wrong, but absolutely consensus on the council here to say we're not going to have the county council dictate to our city how we do our business, and we're not going to participate in this. To Council Member McCluskey's comments, this requires some careful thoughts and considerations, and how does that impact our community? So if we have to handle this down the road, we'll do it on our terms and on our way, not from the county council. I think we just send them a clear letter, say, butt out of our business.
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington.
Thank you, Mayor Bellisi. And so I'm left with a number of questions, like where does this authority come from, and what's the history that suggests this authority is available, and and I have the same issues that each and every one of you have as well. Having to affirmatively say that we want out, I also take offense to that action as well. But we need to tell the county council that this is not an action that we think they need to extend their authority into University Place. Regardless of the merits of what they may be doing, it's how they're going about it and under whose authority it gets to be done. Thank you.
Okay, I'm the last one to weigh in, and I think I bear what everybody else said. I'm on board with. I think this is an overreach. This is the first step to what other things that they will feel that they can manipulate or dictate to us on, and therefore I will gladly sign this letter. So, Mr. Kaiser, I think you have the direction that you were seeking on this.
I have the direction I need. We'll get something out in the morning with the mayor's signature on it.
Okay. At this point,
Make it direct, Madam Mayor.
yes, I think Mr. Kaiser will do a very fine job in capturing our comments. So our next item on the agenda is council comments.
Before we move on, I don't know if the manager had anything.
Oh, sorry, that's right. Steve might have had some more information. Javier, did you have final word on this topic? You weren't talking this evening, remember? And you are muted. You are muted. You're still muted, sir.
Yes, but this was unexpected.
Yeah.
So getting back
No,
to
you said regardless. So
Mayor Pro Tem's comment about the authority, which some of us raised it to a certain extent. So, Matt,
Yeah.
Number one, is there a real authority for them to impose such a thing? Number one. Number two, if if they don't then have any legal authority, then we need to legally, when we're talking about a strong comment back to them, it should be from a legal perspective and standpoint that they have no legal rights. Number two, if they do have a legal right, certainly want to know that now, and what are our options out to fight that. Thank you.
Let me keep my comments as broad as possible, recognizing that this is a public meeting and this is not in an executive session. The main legal authority that has been generally looked to on this is there is a 1971 Attorney General opinion. It builds on two other opinions. It states on it, let me see if I got it in a different window. The money quote, as it were, at the end. When the original question was posed by the prosecuting attorney out of King County back in 1971, the question was whether a county ordinance is binding within the confines of an incorporated area located within such county. The conclusion to that was our direct answer to your present question has before that a county ordinance enacted pursuant to Article 11, Section 11 of our state constitution, supra, is applicable only within those portions of the county which are not occupied by incorporated cities and towns. End opinion. So, I mean, that's been the Attorney General's longstanding opinion since 1971. I've looked at this. I know my counterpart in at least one other jurisdiction has looked at it, and it's been represented to me. It's been run through MRSC. They can't find anything more recent.
So,
okay, thank you.
So,
and I have faith that Mr. Kaiser will draft a letter that strongly states our opinion as voiced this evening, and I won't approve my signature until it strongly states the same. So, yeah. So with that, Mr. Sugg, do you have additional comments for city manager report?
Thank you, Mayor. Just real quick, for the past 2 Monday mornings, I've been myself, along with the public safety manager, Jennifer Hales, have been meeting with the county execs group on a vaccination task force. And progress has been made in the past week, and more progress still needs to be made. But they're both the public and private sector, 50 units of government and private sector entities are working, and more along the way, including universities, are really collectively rowing in the same direction, trying to get more people vaccinated, get the vaccination rates up, and hopefully we can turn the corner, because as you know, we were put back into phase 2, and that was a disappointment. So anyway, I want to let you know that vaccination rates ticked up last week. It's still not where we need to be, but lots more things to come. So.
All right. Thank you very much. So with that, we are on to council comments. Councilmember Figueroa, do you have any comments or report outs at this time?
Just one comment, which I'll use now for the previous conversation. That is, would you be, besides writing that letter, would you be personally, as our spokesperson, calling our county representative? Thank you. Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. That's all.
Yep. Had plans on doing that already. Councilmember Keel, do you have any comments or report outs at this time?
Well, great, thank you. Well, using the same topic, I plan on calling him as well myself. So other than that, I have nothing else to say.
Okay. Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, do you have any report outs or comments at this time?
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, I have nothing to report on. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember McCluskey, do you have any report outs or comments at this time?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mayor. This is on a more fun note. I was able to, we need a little bit of fun right now. I was able to attend the natural yard care that our city is sponsored and supportive through our swim funds with the Pierce County Health Department. And the topic on that one was container gardening. And so typically we think of gardening in dirt. Well, Miriam Benetti, who was the trainer, exclusively noted how we could do container gardenings out of containers, whether it's in a garden as we know it to be, or taking gardens on the deck. And she was particularly focused on floral arrangements in color, texture, and aesthetics and harmony. And in regards to also looking at plant foliage rather than florals to add color to your garden. And so with everything that Miriam Benetti does, she was lively, spontaneous, educational. So I enjoyed it and I got a lot out of it, and I will never look at another container the same way ever again, which is why I spent some money at some local gardening centers to up my game on my decks. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Fleming, do you have a report out or comments at this time?
Madam Mayor, thank you. I do not tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, any report outs or comments?
Thank you, Mayor Belisi, but no, in fact, I don't, but thank you for asking.
All right. Well, I do have a report out on the 28th of April. GGLO, who is doing our Homestead Park planning, had a public Zoom meeting. Unfortunately, that was the same night as the presidential speech. And there weren't as many of the public there as I would have had hoped, but those that were there were very engaged in the process. I thought GGLO did a superb job of presenting the plan and options, and allowed the people through breakout groups to voice their opinion on how they saw the park moving forward. And I think the general consensus from the report outs of those various groups is that they all value the nature side of it, the roadies, the plantings, etc., but do agree that lighting needs to be looked at, pathway definitions should be greatly enhanced, and that whatever play structures or public structures that are put into the park at some future point should be very reminiscent and very much in a natural sort of setting, so that it all blends together. So it was really nice to have them engaged in the process. So we're looking forward to seeing the report from GGLO moving forward. But I can tell you that, had this public meeting been held where citizens could actually come in and do their stickers themselves and really engage in the process, I think we would have had far greater numbers of citizens than we had on the 28th. And so I appreciate the work GGLO did, but I was somewhat disappointed not to see a larger turnout of individuals. But again, it's hard to say if it was just because it's virtual or because this first presidential speech since President Biden took office, if that kept people away. But if we don't get us opened up in the very near future, we're really going to lose what little contact we have with our citizens out there, and that's extremely disappointing. The engagement leaves a lot to be desired. So that's my commentary as well as a report out. And with that, I will close that section of the meeting. We will move on to our study session. We're talking about the University Place Municipal Code Title 23, the Telecommunications Amendment. For that, I'm going to ask our Planning Director, David Swindell, to come forward with the staff presentation on the study session. Mr. Swindell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the City Council. I have a PowerPoint presentation to share with you, and I'd like to ask either Amanda or Linda to bring that up. Thank you. So this evening we're studying amendments to the Title 23 telecommunications title. The title currently includes a chapter on, just a general chapter on telecommunications, licenses, franchise, cable TV franchises, conditions of grant, construction provisions for putting those types of facilities in the ground, fees, and finally, wireless communication facilities for persons in government. And the lawyers tend to be involved in the first several of those and leave the planners out for the most part. The planners are pretty typically involved in this last section, the wireless communication facilities for persons in government. Next slide, please. So that section here, we drafted shortly after we incorporated and actually got an honorable mention for this work. Tim Sullivan was with us at the time. He was very engaged in this issue. In fact, he went on to work for T-Mobile as an attorney working with them in this field. That was the work that we did there was primarily to permit the deployment of macro towers, and there's a background image on the slide that shows you what a typical macro facility is like. We've got several in the city. They are those tall cell towers with several panel or omnidirectional antennas on top of them. Since that time, there are two additional major pieces of legislation, if you would, that ended in some different rules from the Federal Communications Commission. And it's a little out of order, but in 2014, the FCC issued an reported order titled Acceleration of Broadband Deployment, expanding the reach and reducing the cost of broadband deployment by improving policies regarding public rights of ways and wireless facility sightings. A second piece of legislation that actually preceded the small wireless facilities legislation was back in 2012. And this order was a result of the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012, also known as the Spectrum Act. And the FCC interpreted that act as far as it was concerning their commission, and they issued an acceleration of broadband deployment report and order. Next slide, please. So this led us to have the need to amend our telecommunications Title 23 in order for consistency with those two newer FCC orders. The macro wireless communication facilities, again, is the tall existing monopoles you see out there, or if they are attached to a structure, you might see them attached to a tall water tower or the side of a building. That actually section, there's only two amendments we're doing to that, and those are to do with definitions and also with a third-party review. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. So in the second section, which is chapter, which is a new chapter, in response to the latter FCC rulings, we're going to be talking extensively this evening about small wireless communication facilities. And so I'm showing you different types that we're going to talk about this evening because there are different standards for each type. Here's a hollow pole, which the wires and most of the facilities are fully contained with it, and it has an omnidirectional antenna on top of it. This is another freestanding small wireless full containment facility. Here's a wood pole with an omnidirectional canister antenna on top of it, and the equipment associated with it mounted on the pole. Here's a similar facility with the cell or with the small cell or small wireless cell mounted attached to the pole, again with the facilities lower down hanging off of it. And these are interesting. These are strand mounted facilities. So if you bother to look around, and this happens to me anytime I get involved with this sort of stuff, all of a sudden my eyes are trained to telephone poles and power poles all around the place, trying to spot examples of this stuff. Now, there are a lot of this
Mr.
stuff.
Swindell,
Yes,
do you want to take questions from council as they
sure.
raise their
Yeah,
hand?
that'd be
Because
fine. Yeah,
Councilmember Fleming did raise his hand,
okay.
and I think it has to do with this.
Thank you,
Okay.
Madam Mayor. And I'm reneging on my earlier comments of limiting them during the study session tonight. So, but Dave, I thought our city policy was we didn't allow for freestanding poles like these in the city. That if telecommunication companies were going to use freestanding poles, they had to be disguised, much like the ones we've looked at previously that actually look like a tree. Are you proposing that we change that policy?
Actually, what I'm proposing is a lot of what we're doing here is almost directly out of the FCC orders. And we actually are not inventing the wheel here. We're the original, almost all of the provisions that we've included here have come from the city of Puyallup and also the city of Lakewood, which seems to have almost verbatim language in both. And were written by law firms that they had hired to do this work. And I'm going to get to it later on, but basically our policy, like the city of Tacoma, is not to allow any new poles, but they have to use the existing poles unless they're in an area that we've already required to go underground, in which case there are more stringent design standards and an ability for a company, for example, to use a light pole instead of a power pole or a traffic signal or some other existing pole at the city's discretion. Or
but if we're not going to allow, Dave, if we're not going to allow new poles and in the city, and they can attach to existing poles, those ones, as I recall, are disguised. Are we getting away from that? I'm trying to connect some dots in my head.
Yeah, there is a requirement for concealment plan in certain areas, in the residential areas, for example, or in underground areas that we've already underground all the utilities, like new subdivisions where we've required the stuff in, but we're not requiring that it to be concealed within a set of trees or that it look like a fir tree and disguised in that manner.
Okay. I'll just say, and I didn't mean to interrupt your presentation, but I am just, having been on the telecommunications side of things, I am not a fan of freestanding poles like the example that I see there that's highlighted second from the left. I think the city's done a great job in maintaining the aesthetics of our community by having those poles. Like you said, they look like evergreen trees. They blend into the community. Having these things just pop up around the city like that is just not something I don't think that our community would want or embrace. So I'll just put that out on the table as we go through this conversation.
Yeah. I'll take note of that right now. Just give me a second to find my notepad. Okay. Okay, so the next slide, please. So Chapter 2350, small wireless communication facilities. What we're really talking about here is you've heard of the 5G rollout. It requires a much more dense system with higher speeds than our large cell towers. one cell tower or two cell towers by one company has the ability to cover for probably the entire city. We do have some dead zones we know about where there's topographical or vegetation issues. With 5Gs, these are much smaller type of facilities, like I say, and they can locate on an existing power pole within the right of way. The provisions for small cells, I'm going to define a small cell first. First of all, they are mounted on structures of 50 feet or less, typically less. They're no more than 10% taller or allowed to be 10% taller than any existing adjacent structures. They do not extend a structure height to more than 50 feet or 10%, whichever is greater. Each antenna equipment associated with the structure, including wireless equipment, is no more than 28 cubic feet in volume. The antenna itself is no more than 3 cubic feet in volume. So these are, as I say, pretty small. They do not result in human exposure to radio frequencies in excess of applicable safety standards. And they are built in networks of small interrelated small cell facilities designed to provide that wireless service. I did a map. They have a range of up to 6,000 feet between towers. I figured that if one provider were to come into the city, they could probably establish a full network in the city with 12 antenna. So not a lot. They'd be pretty spread out. You probably wouldn't notice them all that much. There are franchise agreements like the franchise agreements that you already require for television franchises and cable franchises where they've buried cable in our right-of-ways or placed them on power poles. In addition to that, those facilities that we allow today, as well as these new wireless facilities, would require a right-of-way permit to be located within the right-of-way. There is an application and review process that is fairly stringent and probably more draconian than I would have preferred if I had written this myself. But these processes were written by the FCC, who are trying to balance the interests of larger, more influential political groups and communities against the wishes of the telecommunications industry, and they are often at odds. As I indicated earlier, there are design zones, areas where we have already required that all the utilities be placed underground. Whenever we have new development go in, that's the case. And then also on city parks and city facilities. There are 4 principally types of structures that are used to mount these wireless facilities on. There are existing utility poles, wooden utility poles, typically belonging to the power company. There are also existing non-wooden poles. These are mostly metal. And there's tall power poles in the city along Bridgeport Way, for example, but also like light standards and traffic signals, for example, that could potentially be used to support a wireless facility. There are small cell facilities that are on buildings. There are large cell facilities on buildings as well. And then those are the strand mounted ones that I showed you a picture of, which are actually attached to a cable, a metal cable strung between 2 poles. If you go out today or this evening or tomorrow morning in your neighborhood and you look up on the strands, you'll see an amazing number of things that could pass as this. They are principally cable junction boxes for your cable television, but there's There's so many of them up there and of various sizes. I was quite astounded when, like I said, I started looking up to see if I could find this stuff. I do not believe there are no 5G networks in the city currently. So, but they are rolling out faster and faster. And then lastly, in this chapter, there's a number of general design area and permit requirements associated with it. I think the most important thing to note that is that with regard to where you can put a small cell facility, the first choice, the only choice really, except for the design areas, the underground areas, is you have to find an existing pole to put it on. Now, I called the city of Tacoma utilities that own most of the poles in the city, and they have attachment agreements, and they allow this sort of thing. So any non-power use that you see connected to the utility poles, the wooden power poles that belong to the utility company, Tacoma Public Utilities, is a lease arrangement with, for example, the cable companies or the telephone providers or some other legal agreement between them. So they have the ability to allow 5G connections to their poles. And so I contacted them and they sent me a copy of their agreement, copy of their rules, etc. So they're experienced in this stuff as well. For those that are attached to non-wooden poles, again, they have to, our first preference is to find that they have something that they can attach to. There is extra requirements for attaching antenna in residential areas. They need to be closed. They can't, if they're going to put it right in front of a residence, they have to show us why they can't locate it elsewhere or within 500 feet elsewhere next to a non-residential use within a residential zone, for example, a public use, a school, a church, or something like that that's not actually a house. We would prefer that they locate there. And with as much range as they have, they should probably be able to find something. Now, with the non-wooden poles, because they can mount the associated equipment, they have to be fully concealed within the non-wooden pole. Obviously, a wooden pole, you have to mount it on the pole, and you can't mount it on the ground either. If you're going to put the base station, you'll have to put it in an underground vault unless it's technically not possible. As I indicated in the design areas, again, it's the city's sole discretion where a facility is going to be attached. Whether it's the power pole, actually, I shouldn't say the power pole because that's the discretion of the power company, but if it's a light pole or a traffic pole. They are also required to have a concealment plan associated with them if they are in a design area. And again, the antennas must be fully concealed or the associated equipment. So that is really, next slide, please. So the last area that we're amending, and this is again a new chapter. The last chapter was a new chapter for the small wireless telecommunication facilities. This chapter is chapter 23.55 and is entitled Eligible Facility Requests. Now, we actually did an amendment prior to this in order to recognize the Spectrum Act of 2012. Unfortunately, really all that was done was a reference was made to the Spectrum Act, basically incorporating it by reference. And we've actually had, I believe, 2 eligible facility requests since 2012. So they're really not that many of them. But basically what it is the FCC recognized that many jurisdictions were adverse to, first of all, adverse to cell towers because of their aesthetics principally, and others for other environmental or historic reasons. If you have a historic downtown, you don't want a big cell tower in the middle of it. So what they did, first of all, with the Telecommunications Act of 1996, they set out certain rules that basically say you have to allow them, you can't unreasonably deny them, but here are the procedures you take to allow them. Here, under the eligible facilities request, they recognized that there were jurisdictions that were still of this opinion that they didn't feel that they wanted to allow this or allow any proliferation of these types of facilities. But they decided if there wasn't going to be a substantial change in the facility, it didn't warrant the jurisdictions holding them up and taking them through a big, long process. So in this case, if it's not a substantial change, they want to do a modification to it, they can apply for an eligible facilities request. And substantial change means an increase in height of an existing wireless tower by not more than 10%, or by a height exceeding 20 feet, whichever is greater. So you can go up to 20 feet higher than your existing tower and not have to go through the normal process. A permit is required. The application sets forth the circumstances for demonstrating the need or that you actually are eligible for the modification requests, including, and you have to show that your modification is not going to defeat existing concealment elements of the support structure. I think one of the most specific, interesting things about this, or the intent, is that it sets a tolling system. So it says if you get a complete application, you have 30 days from the time you get the application to deem the application complete or incomplete. And then if you do deem it incomplete, there's a period of time in which they have to respond and you have to respond back. Ultimately, when they have a complete application, then there's the 60 days review period that can be excluded, except for time that excluded. So if we have it and we review it for 10 days or 15 days and we send it back to the applicant for corrections, the clock stops. And then when they get it back to us, the clock starts again. We review the resubmittal for 15 or 20 days, but the whole period that we have cannot be greater than 60 days. And this is not unlike provisions that we already have in the Growth Management Act under what we call the Regulatory Reform Act, which is 3670B of the Growth Management Act. We've already got similar timelines, and for most part, the city meets those standards, easily meets those standards. So while going through all these different amendments and FCC regulations, I found that most of them are, like I said, more draconian, more thorough than our current process. And I feel very confident that we could easily do this. I also feel that it's important, obviously, to make sure that our citizens do have access to the latest technologies. And if we're ever going to get autonomous cars, we're going to need 5G out there in our community in order to get the signals to the cars fast enough so they can avoid the bicyclist. That concludes my report on the proposed amendments.
Okay, we're now open for council comments. Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, you raised your hand.
Thank you, Mayor Bleasy. And Mayor Bleasy, you wanted to go to the hand raising on this portion. Do that right, or did you want to go? Yep. Okay, great. Well, David, thank you for a good, thorough report. I have a number of questions, but first off, I did want to comment. When I read through the comp plan policies that were included in the packet as they related to utilities, I thought it was a very complete list. I thought it was well done. And I don't know if it was you, your team members, perhaps back when Tim Sullivan was part of that internal team, but it was a good job, and I appreciated that. There's good guidance in that.
Thank you.
On some more details to what we have going on here, You had mentioned that I think a permit is required. Well, I may have this wrong, but you use a 10% threshold. When an item is less than 10%, one thing can happen. That is, I should be clear about that. If a proposed new structure or attachment to a pole brings it to 10% or greater, then certain actions need to take place. If it's less than 10% of the height of the existing pole, then a different set of actions take place. Do I have that right? Could you clarify that for me?
Yes, let me get to that section here. So, for example, if you have an existing macro facility, a tall facility, then you can increase the height by, let me get here, of an existing wireless tower by more than 10%, or so the substantial change means an increase in height of an existing wireless tower by more than 10%, or by a height exceeding 20 feet, whichever is greater. So if you do it more than 10% or up to 20 feet, whichever is greater, is considered a substantial change, and you're not eligible for the minor modification under a eligible facility request. That's one.
Okay.
The other section I think that applies here is to the small cell towers, and what you can do is you can build, you can use an existing pole, or rather than using an existing pole, you can extend the height of that pole by 10 feet by putting a pole extender on, or you can replace that existing pole with a taller pole not greater than 10 feet taller.
And that is not considered a substantial change?
No, because right now we don't have any small wireless. You'd have to have an existing facility that you were modifying in order to get a substantial change.
Okay, and that's where we get hollow poles and cylinder antennas and things like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for helping me try and get some clarity on that. And so why 10% versus 8% versus 15%? Why that seemed to be the right number, which is as good a reason as any, but is there more to it than that?
It's federal regulations.
Excuse me, came down from on high. So I should go check with the FCC about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, these came right down to the definition of a small cell from the FCC.
Yep. And so when we talk about things that are limited to 28 cubic feet, which is about the size of a medium-sized refrigerator, that's also an FCC directive as well. That's making sure that we can do that.
3 cubic feet for the antenna itself. Yep.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting that there seems to be some degree of variation in some of the standards that I looked at between, for example, I looked at Puyallup, Lakewood, Tacoma, Steilacoom. Steilacoom is very interesting because they have their historic district, and so that's their design area. But in some cases, they said a small cell antenna can be mounted no more than 10 inches off the face of the pole, and in another place said it could be 12 inches. And so this is actually something our planning commission was debating. Well, what does 10 inches and what does 12 inches like? I said, you won't know it standing 50 feet below it.
Yeah. True. So, okay. Good point. Yeah. We're not really going to see that difference.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. And so when cell towers came in, which I think we're talking about now as macro facilities or macro towers, they were exempt from SEPA. The state had some master SEPA thing they did that said that you don't need to, that we did it local jurisdictions, and you don't need to do a State Environmental Policy Act permit review. Because we've done it for you, your job is easy. is any of this subject on the individual permit application? Is any of this subject to a SEPA review?
Yes. There is a provision, and I'll read it to you. It says, any application for a small cell permit which contains an element which is not exempt from SEPA review shall submit an environmental checklist under 4321C.
Okay.
Further, any application proposing a cell facility within a shoreline management zone or a critical area must comply with those codes.
Okay. All right. So the Cell Act, or the small wireless antenna, isn't going to trigger SEPA, but if it's tied to something that does trigger SEPA, this doesn't exempt that other thing from getting SEPA review.
That's correct. It's all part of the same development.
Yeah, okay. All right. Thank you. Just trying to get my head around some of the details here. I think you might have mentioned that we don't have 5G in University Place today, but you might mean we don't have micro facility 5G. My cell phone provider at least tells me on my phone when I look at it that I have 5G. Now, how do I know? Well, I know because it says I have it, but that's,
There are phones that are equipped for 5G, and there may be, we don't have any 5G franchises in the city.
Okay.
We haven't done any of those yet. But I know that Matt might be able to address that, but I believe that other jurisdictions, including Tacoma, have already received some. The rollout was fairly slow. I read an article not too long ago that said basically they were in 19 major metropolitan cities, half a dozen airports, and half a dozen large sports complexes. And that was about it. But then I recently heard that they had gone quite a bit further since then.
Yeah, and I think it depends perhaps on the which antenna they're tuning or adding to between 5G and the macro facilities, which might happen relatively easy for some wireless providers at least, and but we don't have any micro facilities certainly.
Not under the franchise, not in the right of ways. Now, that would not preclude them from putting one on an existing cell tower.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So that could have happened perhaps.
Yes.
All right. The other question I had, you had mentioned, and I'm very appropriately too, I believe, I think this is a good move on the part of the Planning Commission or your team or whoever, but it talks about, you had mentioned that if there's a need to place such a facility, I think it's small cell, but maybe it's some other things too, in a residential area, that there would be a review and you would need to understand why that's necessary in the course of this permit review. Is that about right?
Yeah, let me read the provision here that it's maybe applicable in the small cell. It says any application for a small wireless facility located in a right of way adjacent to a parcel zoned for residential use shall demonstrate the applicant has evaluated the following: whether a small wireless facility is currently installed on an existing pole in front of the same residential parcel. If a small residential or small wireless facility exists, then the applicant must demonstrate that no technical feasible alternative location exists, which is not in front of the same residential parcel. So you can't double them up, I guess. Whether the proposed wireless facility can be screened from residential view by choosing a pole location that is not directly in front of a window or views. The applicant must demonstrate that no technical feasible alternative location exists, which is not directly in front of a window or view. And I believe there are additional provisions regarding the location in residential areas.
That gives me a flavor for it, and I think while I realize there's a few nuanced differences that are important to have in the code, I've got a sense of what that is going to be like. Then it's good. Excuse me for a second. Thank you. Sorry about that. So when that permit comes in, can you envision, not to write somebody's permit to explain how you can get this through, but what would be a reason why they would be granted a permit? And then another question related to that, if you get such a permit application, do you tell it, is there a notification requirement for adjacent properties? Will the property owner know that the permit's in?
There is no notification requirements for this type of application. If the director shall use the criteria below upon deciding upon an application. In addition, the director may approve the application only if it is consistent with this section and the comprehensive plan. It is consistent with the purpose and intent of the zone in which it's located, and it is consistent with public health, safety, and welfare. We may approve with conditions or modifications, or deny an application. The director shall include conditions to ensure consistency with the zoning code, utility regulations, and include mitigation measures proposed under SEPA if applicable. A denial of one or more small self-locations in a batched submission shall not be the sole basis of denying other locations. I might add that under one right-of-way permit, you can apply for up to 20 locations.
Okay. All right. Well, that'll keep you busy. So, all right. Well, that's an all-encompassing application for what you estimate to be maybe a dozen will handle the city.
Yeah.
Okay, well, good. Well, you've given me some good information. Of that information, one comment I have, then, we may not have authority, given the nature of the FCC's dictates, even to provide notification of adjacent properties. But if we do, I think it would be great, helpful, to tell our residents what's happening in front of their windows and give them an opportunity.
We'll investigate that if that is not if we're not preempted from that, by certainly.
Yeah, and I understand, given the nature of things, we're probably preempted, but let's find out if we could. That'd be great. Thank you.
It's going to take some digging.
Yeah. Councilmember McCluskey.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. I concur with Mayor Pro Tem Worthington that the adjacent property owners are notified prior to the utilities coming in there and invading their space with electronic cells tower, small tower or whatever. So you mentioned that we could have around 12 of these small cell antennas, and would that be maxing us out so that if an application, as you mentioned beforehand, came in with 20, we could deny that based on it's just not necessary? And abutting that question is, so if one franchise provider comes in and all of a sudden they just want 12, and they could another franchise provider piggyback on that existing small cell tower, and so we don't have to double up on a pole for two different franchises?
I'd like to say we would just be limited to 12, but each provider could come in under a separate franchise and request an additional 12 and 12 other locations, or even 20, depending on how much coverage they want, what they want their network to look like. We would obviously encourage co-location on facilities. Again, one of the important things to note is that if it's not an underground area, we're not talking about any new poles. They have to locate. There's no other option but to locate on an existing pole. So we won't see a proliferation of poles. We might see more junk on the poles. Well, I won't call it junk. I'll probably get in trouble for that. But there will be more clutter on the poles. And certainly we would. And then you have to think about the structure, the pole structure and the pole strength. What can they handle? And that's something obviously the power company is going to have to judge when they decide to allow a pole attachment. But that's certainly something we'd like to encourage. as the demand for bandwidth increases, I suspect that maybe initially one franchisee may do a dozen, but a couple of years later, they'll say, hey, we need more broadband in this area. We need to add a few more, and then a few more. And it all depends on how much data the people in our community are, what would satiate them, and the technology. At the same time, we're rolling out the 5G. I understand that Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are putting up satellites that are going to do the 5G globally. And they may easily make, trying to be the future guy, all these small cells and all these cell towers obsolete.
Okay. And the other question I have with all this clutter going up on our polls so that our citizens can be data satiated, when it becomes obsolete or broken, what's the timeline for them to take it down so that it doesn't stay up there forever?
Because that's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, we've got provisions for that.
Okay.
Let me get down there.
How do we know that, or who's a notification of that?
Well, we'd like to believe it's honesty, but
right.
I think let me see what we have. Permit issued herein for small cell facilities that are active use only. The applicant or successor in interest shall remove any small cell facilities, including antennas and other equipment, within 6 months of cessation of use. After removal of the facility and all equipment, the applicant or successor in interest shall restore the street light pole, utility pole, sidewalk, path, paving, landscaping to the condition equal or better than to the existing prior to removal. How do we enforce that? That's a tough one. I don't think we have any. I really tried to reach out to the telecommunications providers to get them to comment on this. I wanted their involvement. Now I understand that there was some involvement by the industry in both Lakewood and Puyallups provisions, which we, for the most part, used. But it was very difficult to get a hold of anybody on the technical side of these companies. Every time I called, I transferred to sales.
Oh, I see. Okay. And my last thought is we had what I believe AT&T come through here with 5G wiring that they did a few months ago.
Mr. Kaiser was the one who handled that franchise. I don't think it was AT&T, Matt.
No, the last telecom franchise that council executed along these lines.
Verizon.
It was Metro NCI/Verizon.
Yes.
And I think I need to double check the math on that, but I think that was a 2018. It may have been a 2019 franchise.
Mm-hmm.
So you may have recalled seeing them digging up all the sidewalks on Bridgeport Way. They were laying down fiber.
Okay, that's not going to happen with the small cell.
Well, you know what's going to happen is undoubtedly that type of fiber is going to be used to connect the networks. So between the antennas themselves on the utility poles, they're going to probably be wanting to connect to fiber in order to get the speed necessary.
So they'll be piggybacking on the Verizon?
That's very likely. I mean, they have the infrastructure in. They'll probably have to come up with an agreement there. Another way that they can transmit the signal is to use small dishes, if you would, mounted. You see these more on the monopoles. You'll see like what looks like a small microwave dish on a monopole. Well, the monopole, the macro facility, it's a radio signal. So they receive the radio signal, and either the radio signal then either goes into a landline, or then it gets transmitted from a microwave, a small antenna, to another tower, and then it goes into a landline, or it goes to where there might be fiber available. So they've got a couple of different ways to get the signal passed along, but eventually it ends up at a telephone exchange and then comes back to another cell phone or a landline.
Okay. All right. I just don't want to, in the foreseeable future, have different franchises going and digging it up on.
Yeah, you know, we're
one
going to
has done and repaired it, and it's just the wear and tear on our roads and surfaces and continual tearing up of our infrastructure all the time. Trying to limit that component, and if the wires are already there and they can piggyback onto it with another provider, I would opt that they do that instead of going into and adding more equipment. So that's all my comments right now. So.
Yeah, and then there are a couple of other provisions within the municipal code that address that. For the small cell, they'll have to comply with the right-of-way permit requirements, our public works standards. But then again, also under the Title 23 for construction within the right-of-ways or for franchises, there's another set of requirements to restore pavement. Now, you're absolutely correct. There could be ultimately a proliferation of these types of facilities, not only by individual carriers, but there's also third parties that want to come in and build some facilities and then lease it out to lease their facilities out to the carriers. So I don't know, there's a lot of money coming in for broadband too. So maybe there's a chance that we might be able to get some connectivity to Councilmember McCluskey down on the island there. That was a problem.
No problem here. We're on island time. Okay, thank you, David.
You're welcome.
Are there any other council members that have comments or questions? Well, thank you, David. The very thorough report, and the Planning Commission did a fabulous job on this one.
Thank you, and we'll be digging around the code to see what we can find, whether or not there's we can install a notification requirement.
Okay.
Right-of-way permit.
All right. So by the time we have it on our agenda for approval, you'll have that information to us.
Correct.
Okay, great. So is there any other comments or concerns at this time before I close this study session? Okay, not hearing any. Guess what, guys? Our meeting is adjourned. Good evening.
Thank you. There we go.